Imagine being held against your will, captive in a room full of gas that forces your body and your brain to stay awake, all for the purpose of being experimented on. What is the truth behind this f***ed up story? Did such an experiment actually take place? Is there any historical basis for it? Or is this just another story that plays on our deepest fears? Today, lady and man, we are going into a deep dive of the origins, the psychology, and even at the end of this video, we are going deep into the original source of the infamous photos. And trust me, once you learn about these photos, you won't look at it the same. Today, we are of course talking about the Russian sleep experiment. According to the legend, sometime in the 1940s, Soviet scientists conducted an experiment on 5 political prisoners. These prisoners were sealed inside an airtight chamber and subjected to a gas that supposedly kept them awake for days. 10 days, to be exact. I couldn't find much information on the chemicals in the gas, so I did a little bit of digging and came up with my own theory on a gas that could actually work to keep people awake. But I'll save that until the end of the video. For now, let's get on with the story. So what exactly was the purpose of this experiment? To observe the effects of sleep deprivation and to see if humans could stay awake for long periods of time without any physical harm. Now this might sound plausible so far. Sleep deprivation is something that's been studied for years, and there's even historical evidence of questionable, unethical experiments being carried out during that time period. Experiments during the World Wars were some of the most inhumane and terrifying things that I have ever researched. As the days went by, the subjects became increasingly agitated. The first few days were relatively calm, but by day 5, things took a pretty f***ed up turn. The prisoners began to display signs of paranoia, extreme agitation, and strangely enough, they actually completely stopped talking to each other. Instead, they started whispering to the microphones located throughout their cell, sharing what's been described as dark secrets about their past. Nothing like a good human experiment to make you confess your sins. By day 9, the prisoners began screaming uncontrollably, howling for hours on end. They tore apart their vocal cords from strain, but still showed no sign of fatigue. But just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, they began to mutilate themselves. They ripped away chunks of skin from their body, tore their own flesh apart with their hands, and smeared themselves with blood. The scientists watching through the monitors were horrified, but they were ordered to keep the experiment going. One of the most iconic images from this experiment is this photo of the prisoner grinning widely. Their lips torn apart from smiling for hours, their eyes wide and bloodshot, staring directly into the camera. The prisoners didn't want to sleep. They wanted to stay in this dark, twisted, sleepless state. It was told that the people that they kidnapped to experiment on weren't just regular people. They were actually people not subscribed to Marina Jaros. So I'm giving you a chance right now. You guys want to stay alive? You know what to do. On the 10th day, the experiment came to a gruesome climax. The scientists finally decided to enter the chamber, which was probably not a good move. 2 of the subjects were dead, their bodies ripped apart by their own hands, and the remaining 3 were barely recognizable. They had performed gruesome, self-inflicted surgeries on themselves, removing organs, muscles, even part of their intestines, and somehow staying conscious and responsive. And this is where the legend hits its most disturbing point. When the scientists tried to sedate the survivors and end the experiment, the prisoners reportedly fought back. They screamed that they must stay awake, and when one scientist asked them why, they replied, "We are the nightmare that dwells within you all. We are what you hide from when you close your eyes and fall asleep." Which without context sounds a bit like something that the cringe guy at your school that punches metal for fun would say.
What's to pick a fight with a guy punching metal? For fun.
But nonetheless, it's also something that would kind of stick in your mind and haunt you long after this situation. The experiment supposedly ended with the soldiers and scientists involved being killed by the prisoners, and the entire project was covered up by the Soviet Union. So why does this story stick with us? What makes it so spooky? On the surface, the Russian sleep experiment taps into some of our own primal fears. fear of losing control, the fear of what happens when our minds break down, and of course the fear of the unknown. Sleep is essential for life, mental stability, and for sanity. Without it, we become different versions of ourselves, stripped down to our most raw and vulnerable state. Humans have actually managed to stay awake for that long. Even recently, someone decided to do it on a live stream. It never ends well. And then there's the aspect of scientific experimentation. In a time like the 1940s, during the Cold War era, governments and their scientific institutions were very secretive. They were paranoid and willing to go to extreme lengths in the case of progress. Or in this case, control. The idea that these experiments could have been real and could have taken place in some hidden laboratory, that makes this story feel eerily possible. So let's get into it. What is the truth of the Russian sleep experiment? Well, here's where the lines blur. The truth is, there is no historical evidence that this experiment ever took place. No records and no declassified files, no testimonies from former Soviet scientists. It seems to be a work of fiction, crafted for maximum shock value. A story shared on the internet as a creepypasta, similar to Slender Man and Momo, or Cursed Goofy. However, the Russian sleep experiment does actually take inspiration from real-life events. Secretive and f***ed up human experiments took place all throughout history. Think of the famous MK Ultra, and as mentioned before, Unit 731 in Japan, where horrifying medical and psychological experiments were conducted on innocent humans. These were real, and that's what makes a story like this hit so close to home. It feels plausible, because as we have seen, time and time again, humans are capable of horrific acts against their own. So while the Russian sleep experiment might be a fictional creation, it's rooted in the very real fear that we don't fully understand the limits of the human mind. So let's rewind a little bit. The story involves a type of gas, one that is said to keep humans awake. And after some pretty heavy research, I can confidently say that no such gas exists. However, there are ways to make humans stay awake. Obviously, the first would be a stimulant like caffeine or something stronger. But those are too obvious. Another way would be removing the nitric oxide in the air, or a way to stop nitric oxide buildup in the brain. Research finds that nitric oxide accumulation in the brain's basal forebrain is both necessary and sufficient to produce sleep. And it also helps with erectile dysfunction. So if we got rid of that, they would be highly awake but unable to get a boner. And what about those two infamous photos? Well, let's start with the creepy photo of the four men in gas masks. This one is actually pretty simple. It's a photo from 1917 showing soldiers displaying different gas masks from different countries. In order from left to right, we have American, British, French, and German. That's it. But what about this image? Well, this one is a pretty funny story, to be honest. Lady and man, the terrifying, nightmare-inducing image is nothing more than a cheap Halloween decoration. I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. People love to speculate about the extremes of human psychology, and the idea that sleep deprivation could lead to such horrific outcomes taps into something deeply unsettling. This story has become part of internet horror canon, a modern myth that continues to fascinate and terrify new generations. Like, share, comment, subscribe.